Greetings, lore seekers, and welcome back to another episode of the Lost Archives. More Star Wars Legends lore. And today I'm not talking about super weapons or creatures of the Stars Galaxy, but instead a starship. Specifically, the one known as the Imperial Leviathans. Now, these weren't your standard Imperial ships used for combat or exploration. These were in fact factory ships. These were actually precursors to a superweapon that the Empire would later develop during the period known as the Imperial Civil War and the reconstitution of the Galactic Empire, but that will get its own separate video later. But no, the predecessors to these impressive weapons were starships that were made to produce all sorts of craft and vehicles for the Galactic Empire. In fact, at the time when they were originally created, they were the most sophisticated assembly lines in the entire Empire. Now, the ship itself was roughly 5,000 metres in length, and it came equipped with 30 turbo lasers and 20 ion cannons, and approximately 1,500 droids. Yeah, that's right, this wasn't a completely automated ship. Now, the Empire would use these on worlds they had newly conquered or subjugated, and would feed raw resources or even any old bits of tech or anything they could find into these ships. The ships and assembly lines would melt down and process these raw resources or even old resources into their material components, and then use them to produce new equipment. This would usually be speeder bikes, AT-STs, the TLA starfighters, the baseline of the Starfighter series, and even AT-ATs. And just to emphasise exactly what could be put in there, anything. Broken vehicles, raw materials, old buildings, anything. Even Acclamator class Star Destroyers could be fed into these ships. They would melt it down, process it, and then repurpose all of it to make new materials and new equipment. While this did create a great boon to the Imperial manufactorum industry in the early years and later years of the Empire before the Battle of Endor, these ships did have some issues. For example, they required the use of supply, basically. They couldn't really supply themselves with equipment, you'd have to feed them in. So they would rely on shuttles, which meant that enemy forces could pick these off and starve these factories of resources by basically targeting the transports to these ships. It goes to show that in any situation, an army marches on its stomach. In this case, material wealth. Hell, the fact that it required so much in the way of resources as well at times, it meant that the transports could be causing a lot of trouble in traffic lanes and the spaces above planets, with the encumberment of the amount of transports that would be around the Leviathan. Now, while it was a good design at the time, it would eventually become dated. As with any equipment, if any of you have ever worked in a technological industry, they consistently rely on maintenance and updates to stay in working order as things change, especially when it comes to cyber espionage, which eventually this is how the New Republic dealt with the Leviathans, by introducing a virus into the programming, which would cause them to eventually self-destruct. Though, to be honest, if they could have reprogrammed some of these, the New Republic probably could have used these to produce their own designs, as the New Republic and later Galactic Federations would even make use of Imperial designs and generally improve upon some of them as well. But that's me going off on a tangent there. But no, the issue with a lot of the Imperial Leviathans as well is that there would be technological gaps in them producing older designs. So, for example, you've got your shiny new AT-AT that can now have a more powerful set of turbo lasers at the very front that have been upgraded with, say, a hyper regeneration for turbo laser technology, allowing it to rapid fire. If you hadn't applied these upgrades to the Leviathan, well, unfortunately you're going to have your bog standard pattern of 80-80. But I am really dunking on these ships at the moment, but they were impressive for essentially producing vast quantities of equipment. Now, the timescale, just to give you an example of this, is for, say, an hour's worth of production. You could get 10 speeder bikes, 5 ATSTs, 3 TIE fighters, or a single 80-80. Now, that is an impressive production rate. To produce something like that, even just one ATST in a factory line could potentially take weeks or even days, depending on what systems you have available to you and what materials, because, you know, manufacturing has to go through, smelting has to be done, and assembly then needs to take place. If you're using, you know, ground-based ones or even manual-based labour, that would take an incredible amount of time. Whereas the mostly automated and droid-based foundries of the Leviathan could produce so much in such a short amount of time. It is why they were so useful to the Empire, despite their shortcomings. And just to say this, how would this fit into the Tarkin Doctrine? Sorry, the Tarkin Doctrine. Well, it didn't really fit very well. The only way this would be able to really produce any fear is its sure manufacturing capabilities. It couldn't, unfortunately, be fitted with an overwhelming display of weapons or weapon emplacements. Just enough probably to defend itself from a small fleet of vessels. Though, to be fair, it'd probably still have trouble dealing with a lot of captain-class ships. But, enough rambling. These early designs did teach the Empire a few lessons in factory automation and also the lack thereof offensive capabilities, and they did eventually apply lessons learned with the Leviathans into a newer, more devastating design. But you'll have to stay tuned for another time when I eventually do cover that particular superweapon. Anyway guys, as always, my sources will be listed in the description below. If you like what you heard, perhaps consider sharing this video, maybe leaving me a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribing to the channel to stay up to date with more of the content. Alright, that being said, take care, have a good day, and may the Lore Keepers ever be in your favour.